Rebecca, welcome. I'm very excited to have you.
There you are. Thank you.
Let's drop the mic. We had a couple of your CEOs over the years who had, back in the day, I think Lucas from Crowdflower, founder of Crowdflower, and we had Renaud from Lending Club. So we very excited to now have you. So let's start with Canvas. So you are a founder and general partner at Canvas. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the firm?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started at Morgan Taylor Ventures, where we were early in Siri and a few other very data-driven companies, and we spun out of Morgan Taylor Ventures, just the tech practice, and founded Canvas Ventures. It's a $300 million fund. We focus on Series A and B. A couple great New York companies, Zola and Transfix, are two companies we're here in the New York area, and we're very founder-centric, and we like to help our founders build their companies.
Wonderful. Maybe before we jump into the data and AI stuff, let's start with your personal journey. I think I read somewhere that you actually grew up on a farm in Missouri. Is that correct?
My personal journey. At most VCs, it's fairly random. Mine's maybe more random than most. So I grew up in the Midwest. I didn't really know what venture was. My parents actually didn't go to college. I got a degree in chemical engineering. So you can make drugs, bombs, booze, and oil with chemical engineering, which is really fun. I worked at it.
Which one did you make?
I did a couple of those but earlier in my career. And then I worked at a nuclear research reactor for a while. I did nuclear medicine research, thought I was going to get a PhD. But like most VCs, I have a severe case of ADD. So figuring out which thing in my PhD world I was going to do, I just never got around to. And so I started work at Procter & Gamble. I did international product development, so new products and new markets, which was fascinating, and I really loved it. And then came out to the Valley in the first.com. I won't tell you the year because it will date me. But came out and was lucky enough to start at as the first product person at a company that went public. And Sequoia and Kleiner were on the boards of that company. So that's how I got my first taste of venture capital. That was NextCard, so the first online credit card company. And those were the days, when it was a totally different world. You bounced servers at midnight and things like that, and prayed they came up before the sun rose in New York. So I did that. And then I started my own company and then went on a sabbatical to go back to get a JD MBA at Berkeley. And then...
That's not technically a sabbatical.
It was fun. Well, I mean, so as an engineer, I was literally working 3 jobs. I put myself through college, and so the ability just to go back to school and not have to, work and manage a bunch of different things was pretty amazing. So for me, it was fun. And then I never planned on being in venture, but I literally met my partner, Gary Little, when he was in line for pizza at an event at Berkeley, and it's really that interesting, right? And we started chatting, and I ended up coming on board for the summer, helping him source companies, and here I am, 9 years later, I guess. So it's been fun.
Very cool. And it's been a quick rise to the top because you're now a regular on the Midas list.
Thank
you.
So
for this completely inside baseball for VCs. Forbes publishes every year a list that they call the Midas list of the 100 top investors,
VCs, yeah.
And you've been at 23 or something like this.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Thanks to Lending Club in large part, where we met. So.
Yes, and so Lending Club was your first investment.
It was my first investment. So I looked at hundreds of companies before that, and kind of what happened is I came on board at Morgan Taylor at the time, and that's where I started at, and. It was the summer of '07, and then I kind of helped them out through my last year of school. Well, then I took the bar for some ungodly reason. So if I ever wanted to be a lawyer in California, I probably could, I guess. And then, came on board after I got done with that at the VC firm, planning on starting my own company. I was just going to figure out how the sausage was made and then get them to fund my company. I was working on a couple things, and then Lehman crashed. Right? And we had a $400 million fund, and I'd seen the game before, right? I'd been through the first.com, and I thought, this is the most fabulous time in the world to start in venture capital. We have $400 million of fresh capital. Let's go, right? And we did some great investments that year. So Lending Club, I met Renaud through a friend of mine at Silicon Valley Bank, Shai Goldman, who's also here in New York.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, that's how I actually have my first email when he introduced us. And met Renaud, and he came in, and I thought, God, what a perfect time to start a company that's lending to prime borrowers. Because I don't know if a lot of you recall, but at that time, I mean, even if you had an 880 or 820, whatever credit score, you had to pay 30-40% down to get a mortgage, right? It was just absolutely insanity. And so I worked with Renault. He came in very early. They probably had 20 people at the company at that point in time, done, $100,000-ish, dollars of loans. But he's focused on the prime and the super prime. And I thought, wow, what an amazing time because in any recession, like there's always a pocket of prime borrowers to lend to. And banks weren't going to free up for another 3 to 5 years to do anything on that front. So he had this runway of 3 to 5 years to create a whole new company, lending in a very different way. So, and incredibly data-driven as well. So we can talk about that a little bit if you like.
Yeah, very, very good. And let's jump right into it. So this is more of a sort of data and AI event. It seems that at least the last few investments you've made had a strong data and AI component. I'm curious, from the perspective of an investor, especially in the Bay Area, where are we in that cycle of big data was hot and now people talk about it less, although the reality is probably happening right now. AI is super hot. How do you look at all of this?
Yeah, I'm pretty skeptically, honestly. I joke with my partners that AI means algorithm involved, right? And so everything's AI right now, and some things truly are, right? So Siri, voice is definitely the platform for the future. I look at how I have 3 little kids, and I look at how they interact with Alexa, and literally we went from an Alexa in one room to everyone got the little dots, and it's in every single room, and they listen to their books, and they ask it questions, and it helps with homework, and it's phenomenal. And how quickly the kids picked up on that. Like, it was too loud. I'm like, how do we turn that down? And my son Zane's like, Alexa, turn it down. And I'm like, of course, right? And so it's really amazing to how the children just assume, and the computer's broken if they can't touch it, and it doesn't do something for them. So I do think there are cases like that. Casetext was a more recent investment that I had done, and that is applying, so my legal background coming in finally, but really applying AI into the legal world. And so helping lawyers be smarter and get their job done faster, and helping their clients spend a lot less money on legal research that's done over and over and over again. So I do think...
let's dive into Casetext a little bit.
Oh, sure.
What do they do?
So what Casetext does, let me just give you an example of what it can do. So let's say you're a lawyer and you get a brief from opposing counsel and your client's getting sued. You basically upload that brief into Casetext, and it will tell you every single case that, it'll cite the cases and all the cases that opposing counsel missed, which more than likely are the ones you're going to want to cite, right, in your case. And it was also crowd-based and crowd-generated. So they took the cases and all the citations and the references into those cases were done really by crowds of students to do what we call shepherdizing in the legal world, to make sure that the reference that they're citing to is the most valid thing that you can actually cite to. So, if I was an attorney today, there's no way I would go to court or file a brief without checking it through Casetext, because as an associate, it makes you look like a rock star to your partner. You didn't miss anything, and as a partner, your associate didn't miss anything, and you won't sort of be disbarred. Which in law, that really is a concern. Like, you miss some important things, and unlike other professions, you can actually lose your license. So Casetext is really great, a phenomenal team, and doing some really amazing things, and they have some big law firms paying them some pretty significant money to help them out.
Great. So Casetext is an example of a vertical application of AI, and I know that you have made other investments like Crowdflower, which are more horizontal, meaning that they apply to lots of different industries. Is that partly how you think about the world, or you're more opportunistic in terms of, okay, those are great entrepreneurs doing something interesting?
No, I'm pretty thesis driven. So Crowdflower was an earlier investment in AI, and that was really where I did a lot of data modeling in my prior life at P&G. Believe it or not, at Procter & Gamble, 80% of the marketing people are engineers, right? So it's a very different world, I think, than at least in the Valley. So we did a lot of modeling, and it was sort of what Trifecta was talking about, where the cleaning and the appending and the adding of data is really the hardest part about writing those models. And so we invested in Crowdflower because we thought, well, this is really this approach where everyone can benefit. And what they're doing is a human in the loop. So no matter which model you're using, they're not 99%, 0.99%, right at this point in time. Really, if you're approaching the high 90s, you're doing pretty well. But what happens to that other 10% that you have to figure out what the answer is? And so an example is like an Uber ticket, for example. A customer complains, they run it through their model, but then 10% of those go directly into Crowdflower, and the crowd figures out how to allocate the decision that needs to happen, and then it feeds it back into the model and makes the algorithm smarter. So in effect, it's actually providing training data for the algorithms, which is what what really matters in AI is that training data. And so they were early. It was one of those cases too where we're really Series A and B investors, but I came in the C in that deal because I think Lucas was very visionary and knew he was too early, right? And oftentimes that happens with these really forward-thinking entrepreneurs. And so he basically sort of was a few years too early. So we came in the Series C, and that company just announced a big deal from Salesforce as well.
Yeah, it was $20 million investment.
He's done very well, and they have some very large clients that rely on them.
Very good. Are you seeing any pattern in their clients in terms of, as an indicator of where AI is most used? Are those technology companies? Are they finance companies?
Bloomberg is a customer, right?
Okay.
So Amex, and so fintech companies, as well as autonomous driving companies. So how do you figure out, you have a photograph, right, of what's happening in front of the car, but how do you figure out what's a kid and what's not, right? What's moving and what's not? Because clouds are moving in the background, other things are moving in the background, but how do you actually figure that out? So they have some really cool technology that allows the crowd to mark up those areas very, very quickly from pretty large companies in the AI world. And then, customer support as well. Sometimes, those things need to be resolved, and speech is gray, oftentimes, right, where the algorithm can resolve, so many things, but you really need to know how to handle that at the end of the day. So there's a lot of customer support things that are fed through, and then e-commerce in general, sort of search classification, sentiment analysis, things like that as well.
Great. So just to close the loop on that vertical versus horizontal.
Yeah, so really vision and voice, I would say, are kind of or vision and not voice, but speech, like text.
From a horizontal, so yeah. You'll hear some people say they want to completely stay away from horizontal investments because ultimately that's what Google and Facebook and Amazon are going to want to do. Some people will love it, and then there's a camp that says we should just do vertical.
We do both, and so with Crowdflower, it was really, hey, let's provide the picks and shovels, right? Because this is a hard thing to actually develop, and everyone's going to need it. And it was interesting because one of those companies that you just mentioned, for a very long time, didn't think they actually needed it, and now they're trying to kind of do it themselves. So we shall see. And the real irony about Crowdflower is Amazon recently became a customer, right? So with Mechanical Turk, Crowdflower sort of added that whole other layer, and they're now working with them as well. So I think maybe other people might try to build their own, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a valuable asset to somebody.
Great. So we talk about law and the legal industry as a vertical. I know you spend a bunch of time in healthcare as well. Any thoughts on data, AI as applied to healthcare? Yeah,
probably our biggest data science team at any of my companies is Doximity. And I don't know how many of you all know Doximity. It's essentially LinkedIn for doctors. And the way they apply data and their testing and how they message and how they build the network effect and how they build that community is pretty amazing. Even down to just what the email actually should say and how they figure that out. One word really does matter. And they have about, I think it's like 73% of all the doctors in the U.S. are on their platform today. And they're expanding into like nurse practitioners and physician assistants and people of that nature. And that thesis was really around if you're really going to try to change healthcare, and we sort of 4 different healthcare investments that have come through time. You have to be able to access the doctors, and the doctors have to have a platform where they're really talking and sharing ideas and data. And so that was where Doximity came out of.
And what about Vuex?
Yeah, Vuex is basically BI, or business intelligence, for laboratories and hospitals. So medicine is an art, not a science, right? I don't know how many of you have had some pretty intense encounters with our medical system, but you figure out very quickly that what hospital you go to, what doctor you happen to see, like that's what dictates your care, right? And it's actually kind of a scary thing. I had a friend whose mom was just diagnosed with stage 4 kidney cancer in the Bay Area. One hospital, who's you guys would recognize the name immediately, said, "Hey, there's nothing we can do for you." 3 days later, she goes to another hospital, all in the Bay Area, and I said, "Oh yeah, of course, we can remove 80% with this new robotic surgery. We have, and she went through the surgery. She's recovering great, but literally like 2 dramatically different treatment plans, with no data sharing, no options discussed with the patients. And so we just said, okay, data is going to be really important in healthcare. Most of what's being captured is not great. And so with Vuix, what they were doing was really just, again, picks and shovels, right? In the lab system, what labs are being ordered, what doctors are ordering those labs, what labs should have been ordered instead, or what additional labs should be ordered, and then trying to tie that into like outcomes and efficiencies as well. So really the picks and shovels kind of at the lab level of medicine, because really when you look at an electronic medical record, 90% of the useful information is actually your lab data, and all the other stuff is kind of noise.
Right. Let me ask you a simple question, but it's amazing how different people have such a personal answer to that question. What do you look for ultimately as an investor? In particular in the data and AI business, since it's sort of the topic of this event, but it's I guess the question that every entrepreneur. So it's always like a big market and that type of thing. But
I have a really unsexy answer to that. I never planned on being a VC. I always planned on starting another company. So I actually look for the company that I look for, and I'm like, damn, I wish I would have thought of that. Right? It's so smart. I wish I would have done that. Or I would go work for this company. So if let's say I didn't have my venture job anymore, would I go be the CMO or the chief product officer or whatever for this company? And if I'm not excited about it, and I want to spend that much time with the entrepreneur and with this company, then that's usually the bar for me. I mean, Lending Club. My plan for Lending Club is not to actually be on the board. I did all the work for Lending Club, and I was like a principal or something at the time. I don't even know what my title was. And but Bruno and I got to know each other really well in the process, and I had been a VP of acquisition at another fintech company at NextCard. And so he basically, my plan was to just be his CMO over time, potentially, right? And when we handed him the term sheet, he's like, I'll sign it, but only if Rebecca's the board member. And I kind of had that feeling of excitement, but like that just wasn't my plan, right, at the same time. But that was how I felt. I mean, I would have gladly, joined him, working for him, actually. So that's my bar. And in terms of the data and the AI, there's sort of this reality check. Like I came from the product development and product background, so it really has to be meeting a true consumer need. Silicon Valley especially has this issue. We call it engineers gone wild, right? And they figure out they can do this thing, but they really don't know what they're going to do with it. And I'd really rather start from the problem statement. We noticed there was this issue, and now because of maybe technology evolved in a certain way or consumer sentiment changed, now is the time, or some exogenous event like Lehman collapses, now is the time that this thing is right for the market. And so it's always like that problem statement. Don't start with the tech, right? Because that's just how you're going to solve the problem.
And especially for data and AI businesses, do you look for certain types of teams? Do founders need to be technical, for example?
I think for data and AI, it's not that they need to be, but they often are technical, like technical or product. I really like, especially the product founders, but I also like founders with a certain degree of humility who know what they don't know and know who they need to hire, right? And so, one of the harder things is getting founders to really reach out and hire those A-plus people and really go for it and have the confidence to go and do that. So I look for founders who have aimed high and surrounded themselves with amazing team members and talent. And advisors as well, who they've really reached out to figure out, who can help them and who can help them get, get further the fastest, essentially.
Great. What else do you find interesting these days? I saw you invested in a LiDAR company. Is self-driving vehicles?
Yeah,
is that the next thing?
never say never, right? So I find as soon as I say I would never do X, that's usually what I end up investing in next. So I'll just tell you a brief story of Luminar. So I have this associate, Jenny, who's just phenomenal. And in terms of people ask me how to get a job in venture oftentimes, and I'll tell you how Jenny did it. So Jenny, literally, I think she emailed me like a dozen times, right? And the last email I remember seeing, and I think my EA screened most of those, but I saw this email and it said, hey, I'm a biomedical engineer from UCSD. I manage 3 hacker houses. I can help you. And then she had her resume attached. And I'm like, that's great. She kind of gets the job, right? So I had her, and I live around the corner, right? So she comes in, and she manages this hacker house, and literally it was an old tank museum up on the hill in Portola Valley, And if ever, any of you guys, some of you might have actually visited at some point in time. It's really an interesting estate, but it's a hacker house now. And so she says, hey, this one entrepreneur wants to come in and talk to you, who needs help. He's gotten this big term sheet, and he doesn't know what to do. And he comes in, and this guy's like, I think Austin was 20 or 21 at the time, and he's developed a completely new LiDAR system, because when he was the age of 15, he was running a laser lab at the Beckman Laser Institute and never graduated from high school or college. And Stanford pulled them into their applied physics program, and he dropped out as like one of the first Teal fellows, right? And so I'm listening to him, and I'm like, can I just see it? Like, can I come over and check this out? And he had sort of it working in a prototype. And I thought, wow, this is just pretty amazing. And so it was one of those things where, I even visited their facility in Florida. And yes, I believe autonomous cars are coming and should be coming. But it was just such an amazing company to be a part of, and just amazing talent. And Austin's going to do some really great things. So there's always the exception, right? And so I think I could typically say we don't do a lot of hardware, but I think it's a really special company.
Right, one last question from me. You mentioned a couple of investments in New York. Any thoughts on, are there now multiple places where you can start a great company? Does being in the Valley, is that still a major advantage?
I actually think maybe being in New York is an advantage at this point, because the noise levels are reduced, right? And it's really interesting. I mean, I think we're seeing higher and higher quality companies out of New York. The technical talent is here as well. And so I think it's a great place to be, actually. And I lost one of Priyanka is at a company here. I don't know if you met her out in the hallway, but she worked with me as a Stanford liaison, and she came out to New York. So it seems like all the cool kids are coming out this way. so it's a good place to start a company.
Good answer for this crowd. All right, questions? One question over there. And microphone coming your way.
Okay. Thank you. Just basically about the case text. Is there any particularly practice areas that it's more, effective for? Is it across the board? How does it work?
It's across the board litigation. So across the board litigation, definitely at the federal level, and they're diving into individual states as it goes, but definitely the litigation aspect.
All right, thank you so much for interesting talk.
Thank you.
What are some of the best implementations of AI and machine learning you have seen in consumer businesses related to acquisition and retention?
Oh my gosh, that's a hard one. Can you help me?
Acquisition and retention.
Of customers, you mean? I would say Doximity does an amazing job of acquiring, engaging, and retaining the doctors on that platform, because doctors are probably the hardest customer out there to actually acquire. And the way they have applied AI, and they just constantly tune their mind. I don't know if I call it AI, to be honest. It's data science, right? And constantly tuning those models. It's pretty impressive.
Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to ask if you have seen any interesting applications of AI that really stand out in the insurance space.
That's a great question. We have seen a ton in the insurance space. Most of it is around sort of how you're structuring insurance products. We have seen companies that, taking a picture of something they want to insure, let's say, and then you submit that. There are usually people in the background looking at that picture, so that's not AI, but you could see you could imagine a future where maybe that could be. Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you could imagine, and there's usually some mention of AI in the deck, right? But there's just not quite yet. But that's really the insurance models. I wouldn't call it AI. It's basically applying different types of data often, or different, or structuring it a little bit differently, or different kinds of underwriting. It's really more that. I haven't seen except in like maybe the picture case. Do you agree? You see a lot in fintech too. So yeah.
There, maybe last one. Yeah, probably last one.
Thank you for your talk, and I suppose I could have asked you when you came back, but You've mentioned a lot of just application in highly regulated industries, and do you think that there's an inherent advantage to running algorithms or into using certain data sets, and I know it was mentioned earlier with Calibra, in these industries versus some of the more tech side of things where perhaps they're not experiencing some of the same historic legacy issues that many of the fintechs or the healthcare systems are?
So are you asking if maybe AI specifically applied to regulated industries is maybe better than humans, or? I don't know about, I can answer it on a more philosophical bent, perhaps.
This event is all about philosophy.
Yeah, so it's in the end of the day. So, when you look at, let's say, autonomous driving, so if any of us hit somebody on the road, we're going to be judged by the reasonable man standard, right? Or woman, but it's reasonable man in the law. And if, a reasonable person would have acted that way, that is the basis, in tort law. The problem is what is a reasonable computer going to do and under what situations, right? And so I don't know in AI. So if you have, the old lady on the side, the kid on the crosswalk, and you have a driver or your passenger, and somebody's going to get hurt, right? How do you flip that coin? And so I think that case, is going to be very interesting as AI in a highly regulated industry. We have common carrier law, which no error is allowed. How do you resolve that? And then in the medical industry, it's really interesting. I do a lot in healthcare as well. You always hear doctors say, well, it's really physician judgment. Well, in doctors, the person who graduated at the bottom of the medical school class, what do you call them? It's doctor, right? And so you have a spectrum. You have a spectrum of doctors, and you could imagine a case where maybe the top 5% of physicians, you're not going to get better than, right? Maybe not the top 10%. But as you get down that stack, AI is probably going to do a better job, right? And so, it's this question of we allow for errors in medicine, we allow for errors in driving. What errors are we going to allow for in AI, and how are we going to judge those, right? Because based upon if you go to a hospital in New York City or you go to a community hospital outside in a small town, the standard of care is different, and the standard of care in tort law is very different, right? But now you have AI, so what is it? So I think for those regulated industries, I'm fascinated by this whole subject of how this is going, if you can't tell it, how this is going to come down, and how those ethical issues are really going to be decided at the end of the day, and how much error we're going to allow. So if in a car situation we're saving, 20,000 lives a year, but AI still causes the deaths of some people, is that okay or not?
Well, Rebecca, I think you didn't.
Come on here.
You didn't lose any single person to the drinks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for sticking with us and not running out the door to the alcohol.
All right. On this note, thanks everyone.